Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks, where every word matters. Political earthquake has shaken Ukraine as 6 ministers of Denys Shmyhal's cabinet submitted their resignation on Wednesday. 4 of them have already been accepted by country's parliament. The fate of the foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba will be decided on Thursday. So what does it mean for the war-torn country, and is this only a beginning of an even greater reshuffle? Now, to talk about the current situation in Ukraine, we're joined by Toth, national security and foreign policy expert. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon, Maciej. Good to be back. Thank you.
So Russia continues its advance in the east of Ukraine, and last days brought dozens of dead in missile attacks across the country. Now, is this the right moment to reorganize the government?
Maciej, it certainly is the million-dollar question of the moment. I think it is. And I think what we're seeing here is more about Zelensky telegraphing what is going to be coming up in September when he attends the United Nations General Assembly, and wanting to set a new slate there. He's made it very clear that he's bringing a message of winning. He's going to deliver that to the White House, how best to do that. He intends to also provide that to Vice President Kamala Harris in her capacity as the Democratic National Committee nominee for president, as well as former President Trump in his capacity as the Republican candidate. Clearly, Zelensky is out to change the equation here. He wants to get the West united about winning, and I think reshuffling his cabinet at this time is foreshadowing of that messaging to come. It's purposeful. He's trying to send a message.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's not that new. What President Zelensky has done this time. If I remember well, he also replaced his chief army commander. Now, has this proven fruitful so far? Because it seems that the Ukraine army is rather, losing this conflict against Russia.
Yeah, and Maciej, I think it has proven successful, and I'll answer your question in 2 parts there. In terms of Zelensky himself, look, he's gone up against the world's, at the time, second largest superpower. I mean, clearly now we realize that Russia was never quite as strong as they were advertised to be. But he survived. We're going to go into the into the 4th year of this war come February, and that's remarkable for a country the size of Ukraine and the tenacity that they've shown. And from that standpoint, yes, it did work. I think all of us, and even myself, were a little bit skeptical about changing the commander on the ground. But Sikorsky so far is proven competent in his position. He certainly has been able to lead the offensive into Kursk, change that game, is occupied Russian territory. And I would disagree with you a little bit. War is about choices. And it's about making battlefield choices. I don't believe that Ukraine at this point is losing the war from a military standpoint. Yes, you're seeing marginal gains that are happening in the Donbass, but that's because Ukraine is betting elsewhere in the battlefield right now. And that includes the Kursk initiative that we see going on, that they're trying to expand. That also includes continuing to soften up, to set conditions, if you will, in Crimea for eventually moving southward that way. So yes, there's some incremental gains here, but I wouldn't argue that that's tantamount to losing it. Now, from a civilian standpoint, absolutely, there's a great cost here, as you just mentioned, the increasing attacks, which in my mind tells all of us that Putin doesn't think he's winning either, because he's going after civilians.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, back to the government. You say it may be the right moment for a reshuffle, but how do you rate the works of the government so far? And do you think that these ministers were really that incompetent to let them all go?
Actually, I don't think it's a question of incompetence. I think it's a question of whether or not the message gets through. For instance, and the one that surprised us somewhat was the foreign minister tendering his resignation. And as you were right to point out, while the others have been accepted by Parliament, his has not yet been voted upon, and that's forthcoming in terms of accepting that. But there are people that have complained that Kuleba is too much in alignment with Jake Sullivan, and that Jake Sullivan has been the primary reason for this escalation fear. And I think if we look to recent comments by Kuleba after his resignation, he's kind of telegraphing you why he's going. suddenly he is talking about how escalation, as he put it, escalation argument is flawed. And I think he's saying that that's basically the message that Zelensky intends to bring in September to the UN and to other meetings that he has with U.S. officials. He also brought up again, but this was before his resignation, the idea of NATO welcoming Ukraine as a full member. And I think those are things that simply Zelensky wants a new messenger. He wants a fresh voice articulating for Ukraine about the imperatives of not fearing escalation anymore, as they've proven in Kursk. It hasn't led, other than to treacherous escalation against civilians, but it's not led to the red line escalations that Washington has feared to date. But also trying to move this equation in terms of getting Ukraine into NATO, which they've long since earned on the battlefield.
So, if tomorrow brings the acceptance of Kuleba's resignation, does Ukraine already have a clear candidate for that post? Because, well, I guess the work of the Ukraine's top diplomat, well, it involved much interpersonal contact during this last few years, right? So now someone totally new will have to rebuild it all.
Yeah, Maciej, I wish I had it. I don't know that it's a question of building it back all. I think it's a question of saying, look, there's a new game in town. And in terms of what Ukraine wants to achieve next month, or actually, I'm sorry, I apologize, this month in September, next week is what I meant to say. What they want to achieve at the UN is to say, we can't accept the status quo, that we need to have a winning concept here on the table, that Brussels, that Washington, that all of their partners, across the world can get behind. And I think a new foreign minister voicing that, I think, comes at an important time. So it's more, in effect, building upon what Kuleba has done, but someone that's going to probably and hopefully bring a sense of urgency to that now, to saying, look, there's opportunity here. I think if you look at the battlefield in Ukraine, there's risks, but there's also opportunity. Ukraine is in a great position to take advantage of these opportunities if the West will accelerate aid to it, surge the munitions and weapon systems that they need to do it. But there are also risks if the West continues to piecemeal this type of aid and munitions that are needed. So I think a fresh voice at this point is welcomed. And unfortunately, I don't have a clear indication yet. I tried before coming on air. I don't have a clear indication of who that favored person might be that Zelensky might tap to become the new foreign minister.
Right, so President Zelensky will present his plan for victory in the U.S. Now, what do you think it will be? The use of Western long-range missiles against Russia on Russian soil?
Yeah, Maciej, you hit it. Right, Maciej, you hit it perfectly. What Zelensky needs to do is have the handcuffs taken off of him. Ukraine needs to be able to prosecute an offensive war into Russia to mitigate the missile sites, the glide bomb sites, the bomber launch sites that are pummeling civilian targets and military targets as well in Ukraine. And to do that, he needs access to these long-range munitions. But more importantly, he needs the limitations withdrawn. He needs the West to lean into that. Russia needs to hear that same messaging. At this point, if you're Russia and you're hearing the U.S. saying, no, we're not quite there yet, we're not going to lift these limitations, I think that's sending the wrong signaling, and Russia thinks it can live to fight another day. I think it's essential, therefore, Zelensky in the coming week here, that he gets it across in Washington to both Biden, to Harris, to Trump, to anyone that will listen, and to his NATO partners, and as well as allies at the UN, that Ukraine has to be put in a position to win. Enough of this defending in perpetuity, because that's not going to get the job done, and it's only going to cause more Ukrainian civilians to die. But absolutely, the long-range weapons is a start, but they need more F-16s. They need more air defenses. They need a lot more artillery fires. They're being outshot by some estimates of 60,000 artillery shells to 5,000 a day. There's a lot more that the West can be doing, should be doing, and must be doing. And I believe that's the message that Zelensky will deliver next week.
And do you think Kamala Harris will follow this sort of narrative? Because, well, that will clearly present her as a very hawkish politician, right? And, well, the question is whether she needs that at the very end of the presidential campaign.
Machi, fair question. There is hope that Philip Gordon, who is currently her national security advisor, is more of a hawk when it comes to affairs in Ukraine than what Jake Sullivan has been to date. And we're certainly anticipating that he's going to lean more into winning than what we're seeing. The problem is, for those of us that are trying to handicap this, trying to read into the future, should Kamala Harris win the presidency, is we don't know who the rest of that team is, who's going to temper his voice potentially, who's going to be that defense minister, who will be her secretary of state. All of those are key because they'll all have a vote at the table. But we're hopeful. We're hopeful that if that turns into a Harris presidency, that he's leaning in the right direction.
Right, now I'd like to get back to the governmental reshuffle in Ukraine. Now, it is rumored that there's not much love between the Prime Minister, Shmyhal, and President Zelensky, and there was already an attempt to replace him in July. Do you think that eventually Denys Shmyhal will lose his post?
I think for those of us that look at Ukraine, we all recognize that Zelensky to date has allowed the country to survive. And if I'm Ukraine, and again, I want to be cautious about getting involved in the domestic affairs of the country, but if I'm Ukraine, I would remember that Zelensky is the one who's rallied the world around them. He's the one that's gotten them the aid and the munitions that they need today to survive. He's the one that still has the most effective global voice to bringing the case for Ukraine to the global community. And so I think ultimately, at the end of the day, his voice is the one that needs to shine loudest. And if that means the prime minister stepping aside so that there's not this conflict, there's not this perception of internal domestic divide, that's something that Ukraine should seriously consider. But again, I try not to involve myself in the domestic affairs of I do national security analysis, but not political analysis of our ally.
Absolutely. But do you think that President Zelensky should go to the US with a newly appointed foreign minister? Because, if he goes without him, that would clearly present Ukraine as a politically unstable country.
Right. No, absolutely. It's imperative that he show up with a foreign minister because you want to anoint that person, right? You want to put your full backing, your imprint, if you will, on that person. So that everyone in the West knows that this person has your backing, that you can accept what they're saying to you is coming straight from Zelensky. So, Machi, good point. Absolutely. Definitely needs to happen. There needs to be a Ukrainian foreign minister. The UN meetings are too important. And it's not just those meetings, but it's the meetings that are going to be happening with U.S. officials. And there's also a key meeting that's going to be happening between Zelensky and the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, as both those countries start to realize they're kind of in the same predicament. They're both needing more from the West than they perceive that they're getting. And I think you're seeing two closer allies in the making there.
Oh, we'll see. Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Machi. Good evening.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more World Talks coming up next.